President Biden believed that there was another Democrat that had a better chance of beating Donald Trump, I do believe that he would step aside. I don't see it in any of the polling. And even though there's been some minor movement in the polls post the debate, really there hasn't been any movement with independent voters at all. And a lot of it's been within the Democratic base that at the end of the day is going to come back and coalesce around him. So I don't think the true numbers have really moved. And I think that he has a real chance to still win this election.
Now, who could say to Biden that he should give it up? His wife, Jill, is often mentioned, but she's still supporting him. Apparently, there are some Democrats in the background who are grumbling. Have they actually said anything directly to Joe Biden? What is going on in the background? I've been speaking to Zach Friend, who's a former staffer for President Obama, and I asked Zach for his perspective on what was happening.
I think that right now, the same puzzlement that you're feeling there is what many people in the United States are feeling as well. I mean, quite frankly, the country is very polarized. I don't think it really matters at this point who would be at the top of the ticket. You're going to have a very close election no matter what. But one thing that is pretty clear is that people really want different choices even than they're being presented by either party. And I think that there isn't much of what's driving the interest is ensuring that the other side doesn't win, even more so than voting for somebody right now.
The problem we have, though, I suppose, here is that he's admitted Biden that he almost fell asleep in the debate. The polls have him behind Trump, and a majority of Americans seem to be saying that he should leave the race. So that's not happened before, has it? Does that make it different?
Well, actually, the exact same thing happened to Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, where he had a majority of Americans saying a majority of his own party saying he should leave the race, majority of Americans saying he should leave the race, and ended up winning the presidency. And then he did it again in 2020 and didn't win re-election. I'm just saying that element, as far as having a pretty significant unified country saying that they want a different option, we have recent history saying. But to the broader point of what you're talking about, which is the age on display, this is a very active conversation that's happening right now, not just within the Democratic Party, but the country more broadly. But my sense is, in my conversations across the spectrum, that I think that the president's going to stay in the race. And I got to say that, quite frankly, there really isn't any polling that shows that there's a better candidate to necessarily beat Donald Trump anyway. So I think that at the end of the day, the Democratic Party in the country will coalesce, but these aren't the top two choices if the country had been presented with a different set of choices.
So should there have been a different choice a while ago? I mean, I know it's very easy to say that in hindsight, but you're right. In July, there is presumably no point in putting all your efforts, all your money behind a completely new candidate. It's just not enough time.
I think that had there been different options on both parties, and I think that, quite frankly, the president's running for re-election because Donald Trump's running for re-election, and he believes that he is the best person to beat Donald Trump, and he proved that 3.5 years ago, that was exactly the case. I also truly believe that if President Biden believed that there was another Democrat that had a better chance of beating Donald Trump, I do believe that he would step aside. I don't see it in any of the polling. And even though there's been some minor movement in the polls post the debate, really there hasn't been any movement with independent voters at all. And a lot of it's been within the Democratic base that at the end of the day is going to come back and coalesce around him. So I don't think the true numbers have really moved. And I think that he has a real chance to still win this election. I just mean that a few years ago, if there had been a different Republican nominee that had been coming forward, and if I don't think that President Biden would have run for re-election. That's what's put us into this situation, really, is a Donald Trump redo.
Here's a different scenario, that it doesn't matter that you are completely switched on 100% of the time, that you're not a robot, that you're not someone who can work on 5 hours sleep. What matters is that you are, a safe pair of hands, a figurehead. You are someone who works behind the scenes. You are someone who delegates, obviously, a lot of your work to your team. Is there a scenario in which actually President Biden is able to be a competent president without being firing on all cylinders 24 hours a day?
I think that both of those are true statements, meaning I think that he has shown to hire a very competent and much more qualified team than we had in the previous administration. Both the United States recognizes it, the world recognizes it. With that said, if you're the leader of the free world, at the end of the day, there's an expectation not just by the United States, but by the world that you are firing on all cylinders. So I think that you need both. I mean, I think that you need the competent team, which we clearly didn't have under the Trump administration, but you also need somebody to be that leader of the free world that has the ability to not just inspire this country, but to stand for what the ideals of America are to across the entire world.
Do you think it's going to come down to Donald Trump versus Joe Biden? Would you stake your house on it?
Yeah, yeah, I think that is a very likely scenario. Would I stake my house on it? I don't think my wife would like me making that bet. But I think I think it's in all likelihood and all practicality at this stage of the game. Yeah, I think that those are the most likely candidates.
And what might the outcome be of that?
I think that it's going to be decided by 4 or 5 states and 10,000 votes in each one of them. You're going to have an absolute replay of the 2020 election where the base comes out for the base. I mean, remember, even when Barack Obama, on other campaigns I worked on, Barack Obama ran for re-election against Mitt Romney. I mean, a very young, very popular president. I mean, Mitt Romney got almost 48% of the vote. I mean, it's a very divided country. I mean, I think that you're still going to see polls that are within 2 or 3 points or within the margin of error, irrespective of who's at the top of the ticket. But it's getting even closer now. And there's just a few states that are going to decide this election out of tens of millions of votes cast. It'll come down to tens of thousands of votes out of those that'll decide the election, just like in 2020. And the person that's able to successfully woo those voters will be the next president of the United States.
Okay. Zach, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that. It's really interesting.
I appreciate the conversation.
Oh, it's Americans, honestly, they're so good, aren't they? Who says that? I appreciate the conversation.
I'm going to use it in a sentence today.
I think you should. Can I just name drop?
Go on.
All right. Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, for God's
I know.
sake.
2 years ago, I did a half an hour interview with him
remember.
where I could see him, right? He looked very handsome. And at the end of it, I said, thank you very much, Matthew McConaughey. And he said, well, thank you, ma'am. I quite enjoyed that. And I was a bit like, oh, why only quite?
Well, quite can sometimes mean very, and it can sometimes mean partially.
Yeah.
Which did he mean?
I wasn't fawning. I mean, maybe that's what it was. I did interrupt him a few times. Anyway.
People are generally pretty dismissive. I think it's a disgrace. It is a borderline, if not actual disgrace.
We know that you think that.
For the Democrats, that they've got to this situation where they want to beat Donald Trump, and this is what they're doing, and they're going to sleepwalk into Donald Trump winning. The convention hasn't happened yet, so theoretically they could get rid of him and propose someone. The money that's been raised so far would disappear. They've got to raise money again. And you're going to end up with someone who no one thinks can win at the moment. Amanda says, honestly, these enablers of Joe Biden, it's ridiculous, the state of US politics. Wake up and smell the coffee. Biden's ego, says someone else, meant that no one was developed as a real successor. He bears responsibility for this tragedy. They knew Trump was coming back. They knew Biden was in his 80s. They should have had a plan, and they didn't. I think that's a very, very fair point. Does anyone think that Biden is... You asked a very fair question, actually. You know, Ronald Reagan, in his last term, wasn't all there, and he had a pretty good team around him, and he was a showman and a frontman, and he was able to do that. But does anyone think that Biden isn't too old?
No, and the point that Zach made there was that might be true for Biden, but the opposite was true for Trump the last time around, that he was, seemed very kind of compos mentis, but he had a terrible team around him.